Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm Sophie. On behalf of Books and Books, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Evelina Galang and Gina Apostol for their books, One in Hibiscus Falls and La Tercera. A bit about our speakers, Evelina Galang is the author of a previous story collection, Her Wild American Self, two novels, One Tribe and Angel de la Luna and the Fifth Glorious Mystery, and the nonfiction book, Lola's House, Filipino Woman Living with War. She edited the anthology Screaming Monkeys, Critiques of Asian American Images. Galang directed the creative writing program at the University of Miami from 2009 to 2019 and served as Bona Board President from 2018 to 2023. She currently lives in Miami. Gina Apostol has written 5 novels. She won the 2022 Rome Prize to work on a novel in progress, The Treatment of Foss. Her book, La Tercera, came out in May 2023. Publishers Weekly named her last book, Insurrecto, one of the 10 best books of 2018. Gun Dealer's Daughter won the 2013 PEN Open Book Award. Her first 2 books, Bibliolepsy and The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata, both won the Philippine National Book Award. She grew up in Tacloban, Leyte in the Philippines and lives in New York City and Western Massachusetts. She teaches at the Fieldston School in New York City. Just a quick reminder that throughout this broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature. That's going to be at the bottom of your screen. I highly encourage your participation. We'll do a Q&A at the end. Please order your copies of One the Hibiscus Falls and La Tercera from Books and Books. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Gina.
Hello.
How are you?
Good to
Well,
see you.
thanks to Books and Books. Thank you, Mitchell and Christina and Sophie, for having the two tonight. Thank you, Gina.
Yes.
I have a little question about my sound. I can hear a little feedback. Is that okay with everyone? Does it sound okay? Yeah?
There's some feedback, yes.
Yeah.
How about me?
I don't know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine, but Evelina, I hear a little bit of echoes, so
Yeah.
I think you should exit out and come back on just so we don't have to.
Okay. All right. Sing a song, Gina, while I'm gone.
You want me to do the reading?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you do the reading. Yeah. You do your reading.
No, but we were going to have you.
No, I want to hear your reading.
Well, it should only take 2 seconds, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. See you in a minute.
See you.
Sorry, everyone. This should only take 2 minutes, or 2 seconds, honestly.
Hello.
Hello.
Better or not better? I'm going to put my little headset in. Well, let's see. Maybe I'll get started by doing the reading first, and then
do the reading.
Headset in. Is that okay with you, Sophie?
Yeah, everything sounds fine. So you're perfect with the mic.
So I guess I'll get started. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'm really so excited to be on call online with Gina Apostol, a dear friend, but more importantly, someone, a writer I revere, who I think is brilliant, who I'm so honored to be in conversation with our books together. Your book came out in the spring, yes, and at the end of spring, and here When the Hibiscus Falls came out in June. So it's so exciting to have our books together. And I thought I would start by reading an excerpt from my story, The Kiss, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. So here we go. The Kiss. Prudence Mercado watched the dark clouds approaching. From her penthouse garden, high above the Atlantic Ocean, she could smell the rain. Directly overhead, the sky was cloudless, blue, but she could see the storm drifting east, the rain falling in dark sheets across the horizon. "Should we go inside?" asked her nurse. "Not yet," she answered. Prudence pulled her sweater tight around her torso. The breeze made her feel kissed by the sea. "Benita will be here soon enough. We can go in then." Prudence placed 2 hands on her rocker. The nurse moved toward her, but Prue waved her away. "Ako na." "Let me help." "I said I can do it." She waved the nurse away. She shifted her weight and pulled herself up. She released a deep breath. "Let me walk now." Prudence surveyed the roof garden as she wound her way around eureka palms, gardenia bushes, and banana plants. Her garden in the sky. Around the bend were gumamela, red and orange and hot pink blossoms splayed open like the skirts of whirling dervishes. She reached down to pluck a flower, examined the petals, and, turning to the penthouse railing, tossed the offering to the sea. All around the high-rise, the ocean hissed. The city, built on steel beams and concrete stilts, reminded Prudence of the archival photos she had seen of nipa huts perched on bamboo stilts and hovering over monsoon-swollen rice paddies. Her lolo's barangay rode boats down a river of streets, passing tables, chairs, and dressers adrift during month-long storms. That must have been something. That time long ago, when people were cast and organized by the color of skin, by the faith practiced, by the money gathered, held onto and spent, when men and women were unequal, when people raised a fist to the sky and proclaimed their heritage, those times. That was the time before the Story Revolution. "Ate Prudence," said the nurse, "your niece is home." "Lola Tita Prue," Benita called from the sliding glass door. "A storm is coming. Come inside." Prudence leaned on the railing and watched the sea crashing at the rocks below. "Not for a while," she answered. "I brought you your trophy," Benita said, making her way around the garden path. She held the golden blossom up. Prudence said, "You keep it." Benita reached her Lola, Tita Prudence, and leaned toward her to kiss her hello. "Oh, so now you're giving kisses." "Lola, auntie, how could you, after everything Rosario has done for you?" "Naku, nakakahiya." Long ago, the country, a nation of digital natives, swiping, posting, culture, and opinion, perpetuated social injustice by ignoring all other switches. Prue and her sister activists organized a national rebellion. It took several generations to rewrite the stories of that nation they called home. At 103, Prudence was among the last of the living story revolutionaries. Last night, Benita climbed the steps of the Jackie Gleason Theater to accept Prue's Lifetime Achievement Award. Rosario Trinidad, Prue's former student and an academic scholar of the time, narrated the story of the Story Revolution. When the moment came to deliver the award, Rosario handed a trophy to Benita and planted a kiss on her cheek. A kiss! The audience gasped. The house flights flashed. Assistants in gender-neutral formal wear whisked Rosario off the stage before it went dark. When the lights came back up, Benita had disappeared. Public kisses had been taboo for years. No touching, no handshaking, no hugging, no jabbing for jokes, no kisses. How could I do what, Lola Auntie? She kissed me, and on public television, what was I to do? She's like an older sister to you, and she should have known. Prudence explored her niece's face, how the eyebrows bunched up into one long line, how the mouth puckered. The scowl was too familiar. She reminded Prue of her own mother, so strong and defiant. Benita's hair was thrown into a messy ponytail, and strands fell all around her face. Prue did not know what to do. She could not understand the lack of loyalty. You canceled her. I did not cancel her. Her actions canceled her. And then when you saw her the week before at dinner, did she kiss you then? And I kissed her too, but that was different. That was private. Where is the dignity? I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to read from this section, which of La Tercera, which has some connection to that also in the sense of something intergenerational. Um, but this one is all, I think, in our conversation about language, we talked about language before. But anyway, in this section, the protagonist, Rosario, has come back from America to the Philippines, and that's where she's going to be living. She's a child. She's in second grade, and she's in her Tagalog class, and her teacher calls her. Filipino, Rosario, said Mrs. Mahablanca. Filipino. Clutching my desk, I tried to guess what she wanted. Guessing was my mode of passage throughout all those days of my long arrival, when I had no idea if my place amid novelty was a permanent condition. Everyone was related. Anything had consequence. The smallest objects had enormous significance because I did not know their names. La Bacara, Lingkuran, La Mesa, Tuta, Terno, Takong. I was always on the edge of decoding a message. Some were easy to figure out, like Frigidaire, that was a refrigerator, and only one person in Salogo had one, Shanko Lee, the town's usurer and owner of the sawmill who had a generator, and you could get ice in bulk from him for a party or store your funeral desserts for a fee. Too many things had many names, like the word chair. Lingkuran, silya, bangko, butaka, also bed. Kama, higdaan, katre, katurugan. Items of rest had many names. Like, okay, in the language of my mother, but verbs had only one. Lingkod, higda. Pronouns had no gender. Hiya meant him or her, and no one cared if you mixed pronouns in English the way my mom would call me a him and my brother a she, and Manamarga would correct her, but that useless rule is the fault of English, said my mom, and even Manamarga agreed. Later, when I had to learn Spanish, I traced the Waray words in it. Spanish had meaning only as repository of more elemental trace material. Its apparition in Waray, la bacara, face towel, la mesa, table, la cama, bed, el aparador, cabinet, el comedor, dining cupboard. I saw the occult joke in the meaning of la mano, hand. But really, Spanish was for the outside things, the things you could make. Warays kept their words for the inside, the things that made you up. I grew up with my mom's way with words, the way she spoke Tagalog with indifference and English with guesswork. For her, English was only this wartime novelty like chewing gum or tennis shoes, some foreign implement of insufficient relevance. Her Tagalog was tokenism, misrecognitions from her Waray. It's her Waray that was the mineral hoard, a cave of treasure, that if I were smart, I'd scrutinize carefully, look for its veins and source, in the manner of the pawnbroker, Doña Tesora de Oro, examining a carrot. But I never read those words in school. I was 27 when I found actual Waray words in a book, Usa, Dua, Tulo. I didn't recognize them. I was in the New York Public Library reading the Chronicle of Pigafetta. When I read those words in the book, translated into English and listed by an Italian chronicler for a French audience about the trip of a Portuguese explorer for the Queen of Spain, the spiral of universes that brought my mother's language back to me in a foreign city made me dizzy. At the New York Public Library, I saw the list of my mother's words with weird Italian spelling. The chronicler's spelling was as improvised as my mom's English. In Pigafetta's book about his journey around the world with Magellan, Usa, Dua, Tulo, 1, 2, 3. Also, Kiray, Butkon, Paha, Likod, Siko, Tuhod, Kamot, Dudlo, Liog, Utin, Kiray, eyebrow, Butkon, arm, Paha, thigh, Likod, back, Siko, elbow, Tuhod, knee, Kamot, hand, Dudlo, finger, Liog, throat, Utin, penis. Dila, tongue. In Pigafetta's chronicle of his journey around the world with words, the man's spelling needed work. My discovery was that what was most ancient about us, our Easter Island statuaries, are words, espejo, mirror, self, translated. When we returned to the Philippines, I was conscious of not knowing my mother's tongue, though I was her daughter. I thought my ignorance was unjust. I wondered at first why I did not know the words in Waray when they were supposed to be my own. It seemed to me that for some reason on a tarmac I had dropped them or someone had taken them from me. My ignorance did not make me feel guilty. It made me mad. I thought you were supposed to come into knowledge once you reached your mother's country, that everything would click into place like my mom's heels doing the tango. And when I grew up, I would know how to dance the tango, exactly like my mother. Athena came from Zeus's brain. I sprouted from my mother's words. That was the rule. I believed in these things, that my origins were a gift from my mother and all I had to do was receive them. That it turned out not to be so made me work harder to figure out the words, to repress the reality of my alienation. I'll stop there.
Yay. I love this use of the multilingual, which is so much a part of our work. But for me, when I was reading your book, I think the story is also about how we acquire language. And I love this about her, that she's, your protagonist is coming home, and she's expecting to know what everything's about.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how she is really like one of the questions I had was like, well, how do you teach yourself a language? How do you teach yourself a culture when nobody is teaching you? Like her mother is absent for much of her days, many of her days, her weeks, her months. And so she's got this obsession with language. So the book is not just using multiple languages to tell its story. It's really about how we acquire language. And I really love that. And I wondered if maybe you could talk a little bit about that and sort of how you can talk a little bit about multilingualism, because it's so much a part of our work.
Yeah, because I have a question for you about that in your books too, But in terms of that question that you have about, it's two things at once. It's presenting the multilingual in Philippine culture. So it's kind of like reifying that, mirroring that in the ways we understand or experience our culture. So that's the mirroring of multilingualism. But there's also this other aspect to, I think it's true of all of my work, the psychoanalytic aspect, this aspect of being human, which is the way in which we become human lies in and it especially lies in language. We learn to be through words, through language, which of course is very powerful for me as a writer, and in some ways, my kind of my shock at that recognition that we are produced by language, we are ourselves because of language, that we are human beings through words, maybe is like a long traumatic thing, and I will say, I'm still thinking about it. It still really obsesses me. And I will say also, so that is definitely this aspect of our humanity, which I think for me ties to the Philippine experience, which is we're like uber human, like the Filipinos uber human.
Yeah.
Our experience of multilinguality, our experience of always trying to decipher someone else's words, someone else's language, and recognizing that that's just our fate, makes us more, like our humanity is much more, becomes so kind of transparent, like the survival, the human aspects of the Philippine experience, the ways that we join with humanity lies in that weird multilingual. And it's not about just colonization. It's also about the fact that we are an archipelago. So those are the things. And the other thing about that is that was my experience. I did go from the States to late, and it was exactly my experience. I was kind of like, what the fuck? I don't know what people are talking about. This is my mom's language. I hated everyone. No one explained anything to me. And I hated people. I was like, I'm going to get you. And I learned to speak Waray on my own. And I still remember the moment when I figured out that I spoke Waray was when these two maids of the two people in our household were talking, and they were saying, "Wow, this little child, she's such a snobera, she's such a bitch," and it was me. But I never told them that I understood what they said. So that's like, I understood it as a weapon also, that I knew what they were saying, but they didn't understand that I knew that. Anyway, so partly it's that, it's all of those different things. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that that's the same experience I have with Tagalog, right? So growing up in the United States, there was no reason to learn Tagalog,
Mhm.
but my parents spoke it. And I was
Mm.
always listening and trying to figure it out and putting it in context. And my mother would say the same thing to the titas when they would come to the house and they were talking about me. You have to be careful. She understands everything you're saying. And it's all because I was a little spy.
Yeah, right.
And that's what I really love about the book, because I feel like I personally connected with that way of learning language, and the way she's always writing things down and she's making up definitions, and oftentimes the definitions are incorrect.
Yeah, they're wrong.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Just like so spot on. And I kind of feel like also the play of with literature, the books that she's reading and the book that she's talking about are another way of talking about language and trying to decipher herself and her surroundings through these books that I also was reading at the time of like 9, 10, 11, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like there's on multiple layers, there's ways that language and learning to identify that humanity through the stories that she's trying to understand, and then the words that she doesn't understand become what the story is about, become what our stories are about.
And then the punning, because all the words, when you're doing Tagalog, Waray, etc., there's so many different ways you could read a word. And so that drove me nuts as a child. I was like, whoa, that means this and that means that there. That means that. It was Now I noticed that too. So I was wondering, because you're talking about, so I'm talking about the issues of language growing up actually in the Philippines, and so you're talking about your working through language in, again, a context that is very different from mine, because in some ways I was trying to become part of home. And you get, in some ways, there's a kind of alienation. And I think there's a way in which how you deal with multilinguality works with that, works with that, that you're in this space that's actually foreign to the language that you're bringing into your books. And so there's a very deliberate bringing into, like parking the language in this spot.
Right.
So could you talk about that and how you negotiated that?
Right. So much of my understanding of these characters in my stories and the people that I see, that I imagine, that are partly people that I have seen, right, is that they're in communities I grew up in. It was very much Taglish, right, or like straight up Tagalog, and it's all about for me, it's all about the voice of the characters, the way I've witnessed conversation, and what feels like would be authentic to that person in that moment, when they stop and they're doing all kinds of stuff in English, and then they get frustrated, say, ako na, like that's it, don't let me do it. And those are the kinds of rhythms that I have, like kind of floating through the dialogue that I hear. So for me, it's always about the character and the characters I'm creating, and what sounds authentic, what sounds like something that they would actually say. And it was always really interesting to me when in graduate school, in workshop, people would say things like, why not just say gossip, or why not just say no shame instead of walang hiya, right? And it just, it didn't resonate. It's not natural.
Right.
So for me, it's so important to have those connections to language, and also those are the ways that that's how I spied. Those are the words that stuck with me.
So I wonder, do you think that the words that stuck with you are your spy words? Like they are the spy words? Yeah, like that. Yeah. The ones that you keep moving into the text.
But it's even really interesting because, remember when I was, I spent a lot of time with the lolas, mga lolas in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And I had a translator for a long time with me, like, trying to translate my questions and their answers. And at one point, the translator said something. I said, that's not what the Lola said. That's not what she said. And he's like, no, that's what she said. He was a straight up Tagalog speaker. And I said, this is what she said in my broken Tagalog. And then I asked the Lola, and the Lola said, "Oh, that's right." And so I threw the
Wow.
translator out because we started to communicate in their broken English, my broken Tagalog. And then after years and years and years, somebody said to Lola Narcisa, "Oh, ang galing na." She's like,
Mhm.
is it better? And she said, "Magulo pa." But I understand.
That's so Filipino too, to just tell you. Yeah, right.
I get it.
Yeah. So, and actually that story is La Bandera, no? One of the stories that
Yes,
you have there. That's the story La Bandera. And I thought that was, and I noticed that you put that at the more towards the end of
right.
the piece. And I'm wondering about that selection that you did. Because one of the things that you're doing with your stories was definitely having multiple voices, intergenerational woman voices. And I think that was really fascinating. The all women, the everything is centered on the woman's voice, but
Yeah,
you had this variety of Lola, even the one that you read, the Kiss, which is
right.
Prue, and then Rosario, and then uh the the one who kissed,
Yes,
yeah. So
the kisser.
those are three generations,
Mhm.
and that's where there are three. And some of the stories, there's I'm wondering about the selection of the moves, how you were seeing it in terms of the flow, and because La Bandera becomes like this interesting, like moves into this history part,
Mhm.
and I just thought it was so fascinating. I thought that the selection was really interesting.
Thank you. So one of the things I was thinking about in terms, well, yes, the stories are very much generational and intergenerational, and it's all about the women working together, right? The different generations kind of either getting along or not getting along. But I think that one of the things that I was trying to work through too is this idea, spirit and ancestors are
Yeah.
very much a part of what the whole book is about. And it's something that I wasn't even aware of when I was writing it.
Mm.
It's like one of those obsessions that come up. And then after you start to read a bunch of them, after I read a bunch of this, oh, look at this. The dead are coming into these stories and these generations. So what I really tried to do was I started out with being very concrete, when it comes to death and the way people are mourning and the way they're having these dreams. And then as the stories move forward, I started to play around with the different ways spirits or ancestors are speaking to the characters. And at the very end, right before La Bandera, right after La Bandera, around there, it's like, oh, now the spirits are speaking to the ones who are living directly.
Right.
And I felt like that it was really important to start in the concrete and then kind of get like kind of crazy with it. But in terms of La Bandera, I put that in the end because that story for me is so serious. And so when you talk about, oh, this is really what happened, that's probably one of the oldest stories in the collection, and actually was written at the time that I was doing my research with the Lolas, and it came out with a journal, I think Perry Schooner, like way back in the day.
I
And
think that's why, because it was
I
familiar to
felt
me
like
with Lola's house, no?
that's a pretty heavy story, and really needed to be like closer to the end so that it would resonate. Like if you put it
Yeah,
at the very beginning, it makes it
yeah,
hard
yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
get through the rest of the story.
Especially since it's paired with the other one that's more backward and forward, like really kind of way in a future time. So
Right.
they're all really interesting. And I noted that because having read Lola's House, Sola Banderas, oh, this moves into that
Yeah.
territory. I was actually wondering if there would be more of that. But yeah, there's it
There actually wasn't an earlier version. I had several. The Lolas keep coming up in my work.
yeah, of course. Yeah. How could
They
they not?
what?
How could they not? No?
Right. They surface either through theme or through or in actual characters, and so um, I had to decide, at least in this collection, like how much of the stories will actually be about the Lolas, because the novel I'm working on
Yeah.
is about another Lola.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so looking forward to that novel. That's the one about the Japanese.
Yes,
Yes.
that's the one. Yeah. So it's a love story between
Yeah.
a widowed Lola
Yeah.
and a retired postman in
Yeah.
California whom she thinks is Filipino until
Yeah.
too late. He's actually
Yeah.
a survivor of the Japanese camps.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it's historical, but it's also fun to play with because they have feelings.
yeah. Love in the time of comfort, people.
So yeah. Well, you know what? I wanted to talk to you too a little bit about this idea of family and ancestry because I think our books share that too. And I noted that one of the things that you said in your acknowledgments was when you talked about how Jessica Hagedorn really encouraged you to write this book
Yeah.
after a dream that you had about your mom. And also, I heard you talking at one of your events about how you didn't think that you could write this story, this book, if your mom were alive. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about that.
No, no. Yeah, yeah. Jessica and I talk a lot about our moms, because I think she's also currently she's in the mode of doing her autobiography. And so of course I'm very chismosa. So I always ask things. But yeah, she wanted me to write about my mom straight. She said, Gina, just tell your mom's story. Just tell it straight. And so it was actually an interesting challenge for me because I don't do that. I mean, I always have multiple layers. And in fact, obviously, I disobeyed Jessica, but there's
How could
something
you?
there's something about I kept her voice in there whenever I did my mom's story to tell it straight. And so that whole thing about not being able to tell, I wouldn't be able to tell the story about my mother because I wouldn't be able to tell it straight because maybe I'd have to change things. And the thing about what I decided about this novel was that I wouldn't change things. If it was something that I thought was true or someone had told me was true, etc., I would just put it in. I actually had my sister look at a scene that I thought I had made up because I never saw it. I said, I never witnessed this. It was a scene of the father abusing the mother, beating up the mother. And I said to my sister, yeah, I know I didn't see this, but for some reason, I think it should be in my novel. And my sister she said, well, don't you remember when we when we put away the knives? And it's like strange, So the concept of truth, of what you think or what you feel, even in that situation was made palpable by my sister. I thought I was making something up. She actually saw it as more true. And so you can also see ways in which storytelling, novel writing, even as I'm saying right now that I decided with my mother, the truest details I'm gonna put in, which of course is horrifying. It's really bad for fiction. It's hard in fiction to make reality convincing. That was my challenge because I knew it's hard. I know it's hard. I make things up. That's what I do. So this was a challenge for me to create a novel out of true things. But what I gained from it was that I mean, I think it's what you're saying also, the concept of someone. My mother died 22 years ago. So someone who's been dead, who's actually still with you. And I think Filipinos do understand that kind of reality, that the dead people are still with us, whether you believe in ghosts or not,
Right.
or whatever you believe in regarding the spirit. I think there's something that recognizes death as being just part of normal everyday experience. So what it made me come to terms with was a way of living with my loss. I'm going to cry again because the loss of my mother, it was very hard, because I actually had never gone I did not go to her funeral. So this whole story is actually, that's the whole fake thing.
As an action.
Like I created that as a, the protagonist actually goes home. I never did.
So it's so moving, and there are parts of it too where it's so tender, I just love it. But then I wonder, so then because this is a really interesting blur. I think it's a blur. It's not a line. There are no boundaries between fiction, nonfiction, with this thing that people call autofiction. And even like I thought it was like so cool and bold for you to say that that you ran the story past your sister or past your brothers, and then
only that part.
The Delgados are Delgados, right?
Not the other parts. Only that one. Because I was
Wait, what?
Only that part. I never showed anything else.
Oh, but the Delgados, you're Delgados, right?
Yes, my mom's name was Delgado. I even used her name. I mean, I'm that. As my sister said, you're really naughty. You're a very naughty person.
It's so much fun.
Yeah. So you were like, we wanted to talk about family relationships, connections to home, ancestry, and in terms of your novel, that's definitely. I'm wondering. I've talked to you a little bit about the connections to my own story. How about connections to your story? There are so many maldita people in your book. People disobeying their parents.
It's all about disobeying.
Anyway, so how would you talk about? I mean, what that aspect of parent-child ancestry,
right.
Those themes of actually there's a theme of disobedience in the text.
So one of the things, I guess the stories for our people really are oftentimes not told by ourselves, right? And these and really it's these internal conflicts, and especially growing up in the United States, like I think for many Filipino Americans who are children of immigrants who are born in the United States, and we have like this kind of dual identity that we're trying to negotiate. It becomes a survival technique to be disobedient, right? Because we're not straight up Filipino, and we're not. What we used to say is, we're not living in the Philippines. Those rules are for the Philippines, but then again, we're not.
No, she wouldn't.
But at the same time, we're not really American in that way, right? We're very much a part of this Filipino family and love that. There's a part of us that really loves to be in, like right now. I'm actually in Wisconsin, and my family came to my reading last night, and it's like we love to be together as much as we love the drama that happens, internally. I think that's one of the things that I have explored. Even I would have to say, if there was a story that was closest to my story, it might have been Loud Girl. That desire to be a part of the larger American community, and then to be told to stay home, to behave. I think there was a time that I wanted to go to a party because of a boy, and I think I actually did call my dad on his paper a number of times to get him to give his approval. And I do believe that maybe my mother said, "Resign yourself, hija." So I think that there's a little bit of that going on, but because the book is so much about the generations, not just hearing the stories from the past, but also finding ways to move forward, finding ways to take the culture and the legacy and making it your own as a new kid, as an American kid, as a kid maybe who's second, third generation. I think it was like really important for me to really like get down and explore some of the things that we don't like to talk about, like Hindi Fang Sampaguita. That was kind of risky.
Yeah.
Talk about Maldita.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because whenever I would be reading a story, because I grew up in the Philippines, I'd be translating it in some ways to what it
Mm.
would have been like. I'm constantly doing that because I had been a child in America, and then I went home to the Philippines, and that's where I grew up. And I'm constantly translating. Oh, what would it have been like for me in the States? What would this situation, let's say in Loud Girl, be like me in the Philippines? What would be the difference? It's kind of an interesting thing, and I think that's one of the things that I think your work does, which is allow that interplay between the reader, because you're so close to those moments that are the adolescent fury, the father, even because even in Loud Girl, the girl who's disobeying can see and hear the dad in his um his love. She could definitely see his love, but even um his strictness, this kind of and those are things that we understand as people, as children, that okay, we're quarreling with the parent, but then we also see the parent, and we
Yes.
and I don't think that's Filipino. I mean, I just read Sinead O'Connor's biography, so yeah, I think there's something there about her and her mother. But I do think that what you're doing in the story is that kind of very clear appeal to these quotidian experiences that are actually really formative. These ordinary experiences that are very formative. Yeah.
I think, how are we doing for time? I'm doing okay, or
Mhm.
what do you think, Gina?
Yeah, I think we had that
I
thing about culture and politics.
I want to ask a question.
Mhm.
What I really love about your book, is at the end
Mhm.
you have sources, and you have a family tree, and it's otherwise known as a bibliography. And so much of the work, there are multiple layers going on in the work. It is primarily about Rosario and the family, but it's about politics, it's about history, it's about literature, it's about all these things that are just like really juicy. And then
Mhm.
there's this bibliography, and I
Mhm.
wondered if you could talk about
Mhm.
the bibliography.
For a novel, yeah. Especially about the family tree is actually a trick that it's a plot trick. There's a plot element in the family tree that I kind of understood as I was writing the book. So that's one thing. So it was actually a way to explain one more thing. About it's an addition to the plot.
Yes.
The bibliography I thought was just one. It's just a weird. I did the same thing in Insurrect. It's like a weird way to point out your sources, to have a
But
caption.
Insurrecto is so different. That's a whole
Yeah,
different
it's
question.
completely different. Yeah, completely different. In this one, it's just straight source. Here are the sources. I think one of the things is there was a lot of research that went on in this novel regarding the Philippine-American War. The research that I did, it ended up being a research about my mom's great uncle, and his name was Francisco Delgado. So he was really Francisco Delgado, and you can really look him up online. He's a senator and all of these things I discovered through my novel. I mean, my mother would tell me stories about him, but I didn't believe anything she said because they seemed so far out, being from a teeny tiny town out there in Leyte where nothing is happening. And then he's this guy who is actually at the center of the making of the Philippines, in during the American period. So, and then it turns out those things, and there's even more that I found out about him. They're not good. I will say I'm not proud of them, but
Makes for a good story.
but but I tried to figure out what the connection was between my mom's adoration of this guy, and then the lack really of seeing of the people who may have actually been the real heroes, the unknown Filipinos who joined the war and have never been noticed, have never been seen because of the way we were colonized, and also by the way our culture is so oligarchic in its ways of understanding social relationships. Is very hierarchical. And so I was trying to understand the link between my mother and her love for this great uncle. And ultimately, I do have the book has a thesis, about history, about our history, which is that we're a genocided people, and the forgetting that we have comes from structural and historical violence. We tend to say that we're amnesiac, but it's not amnesia if it was actually produced by the violence of others. It's not that we did it to ourselves. It's not like a congenital illness. It's a violence. So the notes there at the end are really ways for us to recognize, for the reader to recognize that there are these sources for our history. We can look them up, and we can make decisions. We can make analysis. We can analyze ourselves with decolonizing ourselves by knowing more, and because that's what I did. I had to really understand what it meant to have this person, my mom's Lolo Paco, be part of my family and also part of a war and a history that is actually truly horrific for us as Filipinos. Our history, in terms of the American occupation, is a history of genocide.
Think that
it's not a good note, but yeah. But also we've survived it. I mean, we are clearly, like, your own work tells us a lot about the ways in which Filipinos move towards ways of what you call this, some, even your La Bandera story, the way in which the woman understood herself and her strength. We understand. I mean, your stories tell us also the strengths that Filipinos have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. When you say that, and I guess I'll say this, and then we can probably go to questions. But I was thinking that as I was listening to you, so much of the work that you're doing about trying to understand that connection between your mother and your uncle, and then the history behind that, the Philippine history behind that. These are the reasons why we write. I mean, we write not to say something, but we write to discover these things that are kind of eating away at us. Sometimes we're aware of it. Sometimes we're not aware of it as writers. But we're really trying to discover these questions that we don't have answers to. And I love the way the use of that bibliography is a place for people to go and to learn more. I love it. I love it. And I think with that, let's throw it to questions and bring Sophie back and I see there's like ask a question. There's like one question. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, thank you. I really enjoyed watching from behind the scenes. So yeah, if anybody has a question, please ask now. I'll be reading them out. I'll ask the first one. It's a bit of a long one, so it's multiple questions. Okay, so
there's like a weird, I don't know what's going on.
Oh, I don't know. I don't have a background noise. There's nobody here. Are you okay for me to read? Okay. Hi, Evelina. These stories flow so well into each other and create an incredible sense of momentum despite shifting in tone and voice. How did you decide on the order of the stories? Did any particular narrative elements help anchor the stories in their place within the collection? Did any specific voice or voices demand that their story be heard in a certain spot?
Thank you. Let me see. It's so strange. For a second, my music came on and the B-52s were playing. I don't know if you heard that. I was like, what's going on? And I don't know how that turned on. So we're talking about ancestors coming to visit. I think they're here. For me, I think the way when I realized there are more than 17 stories that exist. But when I realized that I had this pile of stories, I was reading, we were just talking about obsessions. I was reading about the obsessions, like trying to figure out, reading 4 obsessions. I wanted to see what it was I was interested in. So believe it or not, I didn't know what I was interested in when I was writing those stories, because they were written at very disparate times and moments between, like months, years between the stories. But there are certain questions that I have that are always eating away at me. And what I found were these stories of sisterhood, ancestry, legacy, not being Filipino enough, being too Filipino, depending on where you are. Those kinds of questions were coming up for me. And most importantly, this idea of like living with the dead in different ways, right? And so when I started to look at the work to see if I could make the stories one body of work, I started to think about how would I introduce, and I spoke a little bit about this before, how would I introduce this notion of these spirits who are living with us? I don't really think of them as ghosts. I just think of them as like they're here, and how do you do that? How do you introduce that to your readers who may not have any sense of that, right? Who are completely, think that's a little too woo-woo for them. When it's very much a matter of fact for the stories and my characters. So I started with the concrete. I started with something as simple as in America Still Beautiful. It's a woman who's a recent widow who's having dreams of her husband, and who simply says, I wish these were messages and not dreams. And then as the stories progress, and the families are working through loss and grief and death, the spirits start to take center stage until the very end, the last story, Isla, the Babaylan. It is the spirits who are talking to us and telling us to come home.
Thank you. Before we end off, I always like to ask authors the question, what do you want readers to take away from this book? So for both of you.
Gina, you want to answer that first?
I can say I always, with all of my books, I would like my readers to take pleasure in the books, to enjoy them. Almost all of my books, except for Gun Dealer. Okay, I enjoyed writing all of the books. So for me, the pleasure of the text is something I hope readers get from it. So that would be my answer.
I want to tell a good story, and I want readers to feel like they're hearing a good story, or that they know these characters. But what I've been also discovering, which makes me really happy, is a byproduct of focusing on a good story, is that a lot of my readers tell me they feel seen, that they have longing for literature that connects with their own experiences, that has cultural references that are the same as their own, that gives them permission to tell their stories. And I'm happiest when a story inspires someone else to write their own story.
Great.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
On behalf of Books and Books, it's been a pleasure. And to everyone watching, please purchase your copy from Books and Books. And thank you for supporting independent bookstores. I'm going to be ending off, but I hope everyone has an incredible evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So good to see you.
Thanks for tuning in. Love you guys.
I love